Solutions, who will be presenting Developing Your People in Quick Bites.
All right, Tara, are we all set?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name, as Tara said, is Kristen Smith-Myers. I am Chief Operating Officer at Creative Restaurant Solutions. And for those of you who don't know about Creative Restaurant Solutions, we are the restaurant and hospitality industry's leading provider of exit interview services. We provide a variety of surveys to clients within our industry as well as outside of this industry. And specifically, I have returned to the company after being gone for the last 4 years. For 4 years, I spent that time as Director of Training and Coaching at Beyond Insurance, an insurance consulting firm. And prior to that, I was Maureen Rugenvale's first hire at Creative Restaurant Solutions, where I served here as Director of Retention Strategies from 2005 through 2011. So it has been a real delight to return to this fabulous team. I am very passionate about our topic today, professional development, both my own and others, and I'm thrilled to have lots of opportunities to practice what I'm preaching today as I've built up our team in the last 2 months since I've returned to Creative Restaurant Solutions. I look forward to sharing ideas with you today and also learning from you. So throughout the program, there will be times that I will ask a question, and I'd like you to go to the questions panel for GoToMeeting. And you'll see that on the right-hand side of your screen, or GoToWebinar, and you can just type it in. So when I ask, for your feedback, if you could respond in the question box, that would be great. This program is being recorded and will be posted on the CHART website. If anyone would like a copy of the slides, please just send me an email. My contact information is on the screen, and it will be there at the end as well. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Here's a look at where we're headed today. I'm going to start with a few introductory comments, including a definition of development, so we're all on the same page as to how we define development, some statistics about development and why development matters, and then some information on the development dilemma, and this is where I'm going to ask you for some feedback. I'm going to share 10 strategies for development in quick bites, and then we'll wrap up the program with a quick review, some questions, and some key takeaways. Please feel free to chat your questions throughout. For those of you who have presented webinars before, you may be aware that it can feel a little lonely when you're used to training people in person or having a live conversation or conference call. So I would welcome those questions and comments throughout so that I know that you're all participating and enjoying the content and the conversation. So let's start by defining development. Certainly there are lots of different ways that you might describe what professional development is, but a definition that we have become accustomed to using here at Creative Restaurant Solutions, and it's the way that we describe development to our exit interview candidates, the people that we're talking to on their exit interviews, is we define development as ongoing training and education to help individuals improve in their current position and or advance to the next level. And this is an important part of the definition because, first of all, it's once they're out of their initial training period. So it's that ongoing training and education. And it should continue throughout their career. I also want to mention that it has two purposes. One is to improve in their current position, and it can also be to help them advance to the next level. We all have some people on our teams who may not have a real interest in advancing to the next level, but that does not mean that development should stop. And so that's the definition that we're going to work on. We don't want to just focus on those who want to advance within the company, but also those who are very interested in staying in their current position, but in doing well there. Now, we all know that development matters. If you didn't think it mattered, you would not be on this call today. But here are a few statistics that may be helpful for you, and there are plenty of them out there. But if you need to make the business case to the leadership within your organization on professional development, here are a few things for you to consider. One is, as I mentioned, we conduct exit interviews. Development is one of the 3 lowest rated categories in 62% of our 2015 exit interview summary reports so far. So as you can imagine, we wrap up our details for exit interviews and managers that we've spoken with throughout the year, and we ask them to rate a variety of categories, and then we highlight what are the 3 lowest rated categories. And pretty much the only thing beating development is hours and quality of life. And likely in your position within this industry, you don't have the opportunity to make a big impact on how many hours people are working. Although, if we develop them well, and we teach them how to do things in a more efficient manner, we actually can have that impact on hours and quality of life. And I just worked on 2 more summary reports this morning, so this percentage would actually go up, because in both of those cases, for casual-themed restaurants, development was once again in the lowest rated category. So we know that there's an area of opportunity there. Also, in 2013, I found a statistic that the website Glassdoor reported that 33% of employees leave for lack of career growth. And my guess would be that this has continued to rise, because as many companies cut their training budgets and their professional development and the conferences that people go to, we know that this has continued to have an impact. So we know that this is a reason not only that something that people rate poorly, but also that could cause them to leave the organization. And according to Modern Survey, development is the 2nd strongest engagement driver. And so if you think about having engaged employees, which is really as managers, as trainers, as leaders within our organizations, our departments, our teams, that engagement is so important. It's how they use their discretionary effort and whether they're able to put in that discretionary effort. So development is something that we really want to make sure that we focus on within an organization. And so often we hear that people didn't get developed because there was someone else that was getting the manager's focus. And so we have to remember that development goes across all of our people, not just the top performers. Now, sometimes we object to the idea of development because if we teach them too much, they'll take their skills with them. And that really does happen in organizations. We all know that. But I love this quote from Zig Ziglar. The only thing worse than training your employees and losing them is not training your employees and keeping them. So I've had my fears about that, but keeping this in mind, that the last thing we want is disengaged employees that stay. We really want those engaged employees. And if you continue to develop them, what I'd also suggest to you is that you position what you're doing as development. Because there are so many times that we'll see on exit interviews where people say, well, no one was developing me. Well, guess what? We all know that development is a two-way street, and we need to give people the parameters for how they can go after and seek that development. And I would suggest that even if it's just coming in short bites, which is what we're talking about today, development in small bites, that you position with your team and the people that you're working with that this is part of their professional development. Sometimes they assume that professional development is only a formal program or a formal class. So we need to reframe that for our teams. So we all know that development is important, and here's where I'd like you to weigh in, please. If we all agree development is a high priority, why don't we as managers and leaders do a better job at it? So if you would please, on the right-hand side of your screen, you see where it says a question. You're not sending me a question, but you're just commenting on it. But use that question feature, please, and tell me, why don't we do a better job overall as managers and leaders in developing our people? Take a moment to reply with your responses, please. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying time, right? It takes a lot of time, lack of resources, it's not part of the culture, we don't have a program in place. So thanks very much for all of those responses. Lack of resources, we're not trained to develop others. The benefit is too long-term, not immediate enough. Buy-in, we're working on such fast-paced growth. I love this one. Managers either feel they don't have time or it's easier to do something myself. I have certainly fallen into that trap before. Lack of direction, time. So I think we have a lot of items in common here if we look at it. And as I was brainstorming this, I put a few together. So no time, no materials. Sometimes it feels like there's too many people to develop, and so how do you even know where to focus? So you're not sure who to develop. There's no formal system, which many of you said it's not part of the culture, and some people don't want to advance, so you wonder, what does that really look like here? So thanks very much, everybody, for participating in that, and we all agree that this is a real challenge, and this is what we're going to focus on for the remainder of the program today. So our next portion is 10 strategies for development in quick bites. The goal here is to combat the idea of we don't have time, or we don't have a formal development program, or we're moving too quickly, or it's just easier to do it myself. And that is a real challenge. And the first thing that we need to do if we look at ourselves as trainers or leaders or managers, is to prepare ourselves, right? Prepare yourselves, get your ducks in a row. So that's the first strategy that we're going to talk about. And that's really reminding ourselves, why is this so important? So a couple of questions that we want to answer that reinforce what we talked about. One is it increases our employee satisfaction, engagement, and retention. Now, there is a business case for all of those, and many of you have calculated those metrics, and you know how expensive it is when you lose someone, whether it's a manager, whether it's a line employee, someone who's been with the company for a long time, or if you're training people, they're out of training, and 2 months later they're leaving. But we know that that development is so important, and we really need to mentally prepare and remind ourselves, even if we feel like we don't have time, this is hugely valuable. It also provides us with the perfect way to identify and grow our future leaders. Because the only way we can really advance is when there's someone else who is ready to take on that position. And sometimes we really hold on to that. And as someone who has been a manager for a while in a variety of different roles, you know, you want to be sometimes that go-to person. But it is so encouraging and fun to empower other people and grow those future leaders. And we've all seen people who have been held back. You know, they're never advancing beyond that GM role or maybe even assistant manager role because there is not somebody who can easily take that role behind them. And then they leave. So we want to make sure that we're identifying and growing future leaders. Also, when you develop other people, yeah, it takes time when you're doing it, but then it does free yourself to focus on the big picture, the other metrics, the other goals that you have within the organization. Just because you've always been, you know, again, let's just take a restaurant manager for a moment, you know, if you've always been the person that does inventory or puts up the new orders when the truck comes in, you've always been that person, but are there other people on your team that you can develop so that while they're doing that, you're free to focus on other ideas like controlling those food costs. Also, development is important, and we need to prepare ourselves to remember that we can identify better ways to accomplish goals. Just because you've done something the same way as an organization or in an individual location doesn't mean that that's always the best way to do it. Some things we don't have control over in our policies and procedures, but there are plenty of things that we do. And so when you're training someone else and it's someone who's really catching on and asking smart questions like, hey, why do we do it this way, you might actually be able to identify better ways to accomplish goals. And the other element to remember is it's fun. You can enjoy this. For many of us, we got into this field because we love people. We love developing people, so it enhances your own job satisfaction as well. In addition to the strategy of preparing yourself, we need to make sure that we are preparing our people. So depending on what our current development plan is like in our departments or in our locations, we need to help prepare them for what's going to happen. One thing that I mentioned already is defining development, letting them know that this is part of the development may or may not be part of a development plan, but it's providing professional development to them. We also want to make sure that they know, as I mentioned, that development is a two-way street. So setting the parameters, helping them understand when they're empowered to ask those questions or approach a task in a new manner and when it has to be done in a certain way. Also setting the parameter to as far as how much they can take ownership of and where they can look for information, how they can be comfortable going to a manual or doing some research on their own to find an answer. It's different for all of you. It's different for each of your locations, your departments, the areas that you oversee. So setting those parameters a little bit at the beginning is really helpful. I've had people here, you know, as I train and now lead the exit interview team and our administrative staff, and I've had people say, well, I didn't know I could make that change. And here I was feeling disappointed that they weren't making an improvement in our survey process, and they didn't know that they had the ability to do that. So setting parameters is really important. And also getting to know your people, identifying their interests and their aspirations. Some people, it is abundantly clear to you. You know exactly what their career goals are. But others, you may not. It might be because you've never asked them or because they haven't shared. But finding out what they're interested in and what their aspirations are. You may identify someone who has a real flair for numbers or specifics, or someone who has not been in a customer-facing role that would love to be. So asking those questions are really important, too, when it comes to development and preparing your people. So we've talked about preparing yourself and about preparing your people. The next strategy I'd like to share is start with why. And perhaps some of you have read Simon Sinek's fabulous book. It's Simon, S-I-N-E-K, Start With Why. He has a book of this name. There's also a TED Talk if you prefer to learn that way. It really is empowering, and I've stolen that line to a certain extent, because even if you don't have time for formal development plans or formal training or development materials, it's still valuable to share the why you're doing something, why you're choosing them to participate in this development path. Some people might look at, that additional support or training as a punishment. You want to say, no, I think it's because you've got promise with this. Another element to start with why is why the task is important and how it fits into the bigger picture of what they are doing. It also provides you with a framework for making decisions. So if your focus is really clear, then you have a better opportunity to make decisions at that line level if you understand the why you're doing something. So I have a little snapshot here of a whiteboard that's in my office that when I was coming back here, I realized that there were some people who didn't necessarily think about how what they did fit into the rest of the process. So I created this life cycle of an exit interview and listed all the different ways we get the information and how we complete it and what we then do with the information. And what was really helpful is for them to understand the why behind what we do the whole time, and that the emphasis here, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the emphasis is on accurate data, ease of review, and great customer service to the person that we're on the phone with at that particular time. And so when they can think about how their piece fits in, they understand that when there's a typo on a person's name when it first gets entered into our system, and then we enter it incorrectly as we are completing the exit interview, or we can't find the person because, again, there was a typo, seeing how everything fits together, putting things into a context and why each piece matters. Our people don't have to be experts on every step of the process. They shouldn't be. But if we understand how what they do impacts the rest of the team, it makes sense. So if we think about it from, let's say, a hotel perspective, your front desk staff needs to understand what housekeeping's responsibilities are so they know if they're able to get someone into a room earlier, earlier than their traditional check-in time. And so they're able to communicate and think about what their decisions, how they impact the rest of the team. So starting with why is important. Another suggestion that I have, and another strategy to share, is that you, oops, I have to remove my highlighter there, sorry about that, erase all drawings. But you also want to keep a record of what you're doing, even if it is not a development plan. And I have run into this problem where now a few weeks later I'm saying, wait, did I tell you this? I forget. So I would suggest that you break down tasks and that you keep a record. Why is it so important? Well, first of all, it makes your performance reviews easier. How many of you have to do performance reviews for multiple people? It's great if you've taken some time to record what they're doing, what they've learned, what they're picking up on. So keeping a record is a really important strategy when it comes to development. You can also then track who has learned what. You might have a learning management system that you can use for this. It may be a formal spreadsheet. It may be index cards in a box or index cards you keep in your pocket that you are kind of tracking who is learning what. And so it also, when you keep a record, it forces you to break things into smaller chunks. And I found this when I came up with a spreadsheet to track all of the varied tasks associated with exit interviews here on the team, and looking at who had learned what and where we had additional opportunities for training. So just a sample, this is a spreadsheet. It's as simple as it gets, a list of the responsibilities and who's trained on each issue. I would love to hear from you in the chat box, if you would please, about how you record information. Could you let me know that in your questions there? Submit how you record how you're developing your people. That would be helpful for me to share with everybody else. I see LMS here. A lot of people have the opportunity to do that. Let's see what else. If you take a moment, a crew development book that's written. We have a spreadsheet with a list of training courses and an associate roster. Perfect. Yep, documentation, Excel spreadsheet and performance reviews, an email file for each person, checklist and training plan, a roadmap through the LMS that's being put in place for 2006. So when you think about it, there are a lot of different ways that we can keep records. There's no one right or wrong way. It's great if organizationally you all have the same strategy. Then that is the right way and you want to use that. But if it's on an individual basis, it's important that you have an emphasis on keeping those records. So let's move forward. I have to advance a few slides here to the next category or the next suggestion, which is foster growth. It is up to us as leaders within our organizations, our departments, our locations, to foster an atmosphere of growth. What does that look like? There's a terrific book called Mindset, and it's written by Carol Dweck, D-W-I-E-C-K. And she talks all about having a growth mindset. And there's a difference between those of us with a growth mindset and those of us with a fixed mindset. And essentially the concept is that if you have a fixed mindset, you pretty much believe you're as smart as you're going to be, you know as much as you're going to know, and your intelligence is pretty fixed. Those of us with a growth mindset understand that we can continue to grow and learn at any age and in any area of our life. And statistically, people with a growth mindset are much more successful. And you can learn to have a growth mindset. So I'd encourage you and your teams to really take on that growth mindset and realize that just because someone isn't good at something right now, that doesn't mean that A, they don't have other strengths, and B, that they can learn additional skills and have additional development through your management of them. And so having that growth mindset, also reinforcing the progress. We cannot expect everything to happen right away. And so having a growth atmosphere is reinforcing any progress that is made and focusing on the positive. There's so much in the way of positive psychology that understands if you have an employee that's, getting 3 things right and 7 things wrong, you're going to have such a stronger impact on that person if you focus on the 3 things they're doing well. And then you try to build to that 4th thing, that 5th thing, that 6th thing. So reinforcing progress that people make is extremely important. I also encourage you to look for teachable moments. This is a great opportunity for development because we've all said we know we don't have enough time to sit down and meet with our people for a half hour at a time, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, whatever it might be that would be ideal in our circumstances, but rather to look for those teachable moments. So what that looks like for me is when I have someone who says, okay, we need to make a change in our survey system, and they've never done it before, and rather than me just doing it myself, I'll say, well, here, do you want to watch? So you just grab that moment and you see, here's the opportunity to learn that. Also, when you have a mistake, those are absolutely teachable moments. So you see here, create an atmosphere where everyone is succeeding and learning daily. Originally, I had succeeding and failing daily. That sounded a little bit scary to me. But the idea that we are learning from each of our mistakes or any errors. So as an example, we have new people on our team that are scheduling exit interviews, and someone made an error with the time zone. And so we called the person at 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific instead of 9 o'clock as they had scheduled. It's not the end of the world, but we are really focused on making sure that we, first of all, only call people between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. local time, unless they request otherwise. But more importantly, if we scheduled it at a specific time, we want to call them at that time. There was a confusion whether the person was in Mountain Time or Pacific, and when we called, he was upset. So that was a perfect opportunity to go to the scheduling staff and remind them, because they know it's important, but when we can say, hey, look, one of our interviewers just got yelled at because we called someone at the wrong time, it really helps reinforce that, okay, yep, that's why it's so important. And even though, most of the time we have the time zone right, and it can be annoying to confirm with someone, oh, you're in Eastern time, right? It reinforces how important that is. I'd love to hear from you about other ways that you find opportunities and teachable moments when you can just train right at the time. Can you share those with me through chat, and I'll share those with the audience as well. And Tara, I'm looking for a way to maybe expand the question section because it's a little bit difficult to see here, but I'm hoping I can do so. So if you'll take a moment, and I think I figured it out, send opportunities that you've had for those teachable moments. So here's someone who comments and says, you know, when business starts in a new market or a new project. And I have found that people's eyes really light up when you can say to them, you know, hey, we have something starting up. Do you want to sit with me while I work on this? Do you want to participate in these first conference calls? Do you want to listen in? So it's a fresh opportunity. You're spending that time anyway, but you're inviting them to spend time as well. Another great example that came through from one of the participants here is debrief after a project ends. So what a great suggestion, because so often you do your part of a project and then you don't hear about it again, or you don't know how what you did impacted the rest of the team or the rest of that particular initiative. So spending time to debrief is extremely important for everybody involved in that process, and seeing how their piece fit in. Another suggestion that came through is menu changes, and absolutely that's when you want to make sure that you're creating that opportunity, and even when you have a menu change, having a few people of your team see, okay, here are all the administrative back-end pieces that have to happen when a menu changes. So thanks to those who participated in that question. We have a few more strategies that I'd like to share with you, and this one, I promise I didn't just pick it because it has a cute picture, but the whole concept of striking while the iron is hot. So picture, you know, this term or this idiom, I guess, originated with a blacksmith. If he delays shaping the iron when it's hot and pliable and easily shaped, the metal cools and hardens and that opportunity is lost. So we really need to strike while the iron is hot, and it's the same thing in terms of development. It doesn't always come as a perfectly planned piece, so here's some ways you can strike while the iron is hot. One is, of course, to seize those opportunities that present themselves. You have an extra 5 minutes. That's sometimes all it takes to show a tiny piece of the puzzle. Also, when you have a question that arises, or also using those errors as a time to learn. What was wrong, why it matters, and how to fix it. And this is so important for us to remember, to remind anyone who's doing development, that when there's a mistake, if you just fix it and don't ever tell the person, so they don't know they made the mistake, they don't know how it impacted anyone, so they're very likely to make it again, and they don't know how to fix it, you know, you've just missed a big opportunity there. So sometimes you need to pull someone in and say, hey, this is incorrect, this was plated incorrectly, how is it supposed to be plated, have them fix it, explain why it matters, because the guest is looking at the menu, for example, or they order this every time, so if it looks differently this time, and here's how to fix it. And that can come from big mistakes or little small mistakes. But remembering to strike while the iron is hot is a great way to do those development in really, really quick bites. So we have the opportunity to learn from our errors. Now, many of the strategies that I've shared with you are focused on individual moments and those quick bites. Sometimes we want to do quick bites for an entire team. So this is a tip that I'm going to ask Maureen Rukin-Bales, the president of Creative Restaurant Solutions, to share. She has originated the idea of the 5-minute focal point, and that was when she was director of operations at Boston Market. Now she's the president of Creative Restaurant Solutions. Maureen, I love the way that you described this, so thanks for taking the time out of your schedule today to share the concept of 5-minute focal points with us.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Kristen. As Kristen mentioned, I did use this process when I was Director of Operations at Boston Market, but I guess if I were really to reflect back on some prior positions, I used the concept in other positions as well when I was either training somebody individually or training a team, developing a training team versus an operations team. So it's very flexible and it works. What I like about it is that somebody mentioned earlier that we have to make sure that we're getting immediate results. And it's one of the reasons why we a lot of times don't do development. And I found by doing these 5-minute focal points that the results were pretty immediate. So let's talk about how did I go about it and what was my approach. So imagine with me, first of all, that you're holding a magnifying glass. And you're taking that magnifying glass to go ahead and review the results that you have, whether it be for your department, whether it be for your organization, and as I mentioned, maybe even for an individual. And when I say review the results, I'm talking about looking at things like your mystery shops, your QSC audits, health inspections, your P&L, performance reviews you might look at on a collective basis for your entire department. And even in today's day and age, we can use Yelp and other social media avenues to see what are the consistent problems that are occurring within our operation. So from taking that magnifying glass and really digging into the results, your goal is to identify the trends and opportunities that exist in the results that you're getting. So what consistent is happening? And if you were to spend some time focusing on those trends and opportunities, you could help improve the results that you're getting. So once you have the trends and opportunities identified, you then want to go back and clarify the goal. Now, in order to clarify the goal, there are times that I would either go back to the training materials or I would go back to the company standards to see, okay, let's calibrate the gap between what the results are that you've just explored and what the goal is. And you want to identify what potentially could be causing that gap. From there, I would then look for content that would help me shift the behaviors. And that might be an excerpt from a book. It might be the next level of a topic or a standard. It might be going back to the basics of a standard. But I would identify, what's a small chunk that I could present to my team either in a pre-meal shift or in a team meeting on a weekly basis. What's a short snippet or a 5-minute focal point that if we focus on it for several days or a week would help drive results and improve them? And then I would present that information to the team and we'd have a conversation. It would kind of be a little bit of a therapy session at times where we would talk about other roadblocks that might exist. But the end goal would be to provide some type of content and development so that we're improving the results. And then I consistently had to reinforce as needed. And it would just be circling back to the people that were in the meeting. It might be having one-on-one meetings with people to either take it to an even higher level or, again, stay at the basics depending upon what the individual needs were within the team. But the follow-up part is critical in this as well, just to make sure that people get what it is that you were trying to develop them with. So that's what a 5-minute focal point is.
Great.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you, Maureen. And in the example that you shared, I believe, with me yesterday, it was talking about, you may have a real issue with, if you have something that's impacting, I'm trying to think now. Sorry, Maureen, I just lost the example we were talking about, but I know one of them was in terms of food costs. So the message that you're sharing is consistent with front of the house and back of the house, but the specific behaviors that you need in each of those areas are unique to that population. So the overall goal and the focus is on, keeping the food costs in check, but the different way that you discuss that with each of the parties might be varied. Am I getting that correctly?
Absolutely. You have to tailor the development to the people that you're speaking with. So it might be the same opportunity, but the message would be different to the front of the house or the back of the house or your front desk staff or housekeeping. So depending upon the audience, the content might be slightly different.
That's absolutely correct. So thank you for that, Maureen. And something that we remember sometimes when we're the person who has to repeat something over and over again, it can feel tiresome or, hey, aren't our people bored of this? But look how many messages all of our employees, team members, coworkers, and us, how many we're receiving on a daily basis, both formal messages from emails and texts to just marketing and advertising. So that reinforcement is very, very important. So I appreciate Maureen sharing that with us. One of our last strategies to share is be patient. And of course I had to put a picture of a patient, but whether you're the patient or the physician there, we really want to remember that if you're anything like me, sometimes we wish or expect people to learn everything right the first time, but of course we don't learn everything right the first time. And it's important that we remember how to be patient. So a few examples. One is put yourself in their shoes. Now, I started conducting manager exit interviews 10 years ago as a part-time employee with Maureen and on her team. And so it is hard for me, but I do such a better job in training and managing and developing my people when I remember this may be the very first time that they're conducting exit interviews. We've hired people with extensive HR and or restaurant experience, but what we do and the way we do it is, of course, unique to our company. So I think that patience is really important in putting yourself in that particular, that person's shoes, excuse me. Also, even your A players, you cannot expect them to learn everything the first time, and they may get it right the first 7 times, but then make a mistake. So expect setbacks. No matter how in-depth your training or development is, or the conversations that you've had, and you try to anticipate every situation, you can't, and people don't remember it just hearing it once or twice. So taking the time to expect those setbacks and not belittle your people or diminish or stay away from training them other things simply because there's a setback. And then, as we talked about before, and I can't emphasize it enough, learn from mistakes and allow yourself, first of all, to show that you make mistakes, and using those mistakes as an opportunity for learning when you have that opportunity, but also encouraging other people to learn from their mistakes. And then finally, remember the payoff, and I have this little chart here because so often we feel like we don't have time. We are so busy. We are opening new locations. We are hiring people. We are training people. We have the many, many P&L responsibilities that we have, and so on. It's different for each of us. But remember that sometimes you might have to invest 10 minutes today, 10 minutes tomorrow, maybe even 10 minutes the next day, or 30 minutes the next day. But that person might take that particular small task off of your plate for the next 10 months. So you're still going to get a huge return on investment. And we need to remember, as we're developing our people and as we're helping others develop their people, that that investment does pay off. And sometimes someone leaves an organization, or you train or develop someone over and over again on a particular item and they just don't catch it. But most often, when you spent that time, you can start to see those items go off of your to-do list, or you see that person continue to feel better about themselves and advance and develop, and that is a payoff for everybody, for the organization, for the person that you're developing, as well as for yourself. So remember that payoff. And here's a sample approach that helps us in being patient, so it's not just sink or swim. First of all, you do it, you do the task, and they watch. Secondly, you do it together. Then they do it and you watch. And then you continue to have an audit period so that you have the opportunity to keep an eye out and make sure that that person continues to do that task in the way that with the results that you've expected or asked them to have. So that's a similar method that you might use for training, but remember that it works for development as well. Another strategy that I'd like you to remember is to ask questions. When we're the people with the skills and the knowledge, we might feel as if we have all the answers, yet we are better suited to have the questions. So first, don't assume what they know or what they don't know. You can always test their knowledge with a few questions about how they would go about doing something. And then secondly, I have the suggestion here of being Socrates. Many of us have heard about the Socratic method, which is a form of inquiry and discussion based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and illuminate ideas. And a few minutes ago, you heard from Maureen, the president of CRS. She is excellent at this. She will say to me, what do you think? And often I have an opinion, but I might have just come to her with here's my situation, what should I do? Well, you have team members that do that as well. Go back to them and say, what do you think we should do? And why do you think that? And especially if you've given them a framework for decision making, they often know the answer. They're looking for validation. So it's so important, and we can be very tempted when we're moving quickly to give them the answer, but it's better to have them think it through, and sometimes even to have them argue both ways. You know, we have to make a decision sometimes with our exit interviews about how we classify certain responses. And so we'll put it back on that person, and I'll have them argue it one way and then argue it the other, and maybe argue isn't the right word, but, you know, to take two different positions on it, picture the high school debate team, and then that helps them come to the decision. And the last strategy that I'd like to share with you today is to adapt your approach. We all know development is not one size fits all, but rather one size fits one for both you as the teacher or instructor as well as for each of your learners. Now, years ago I had a boss who would teach something or tell you how to do something, and if you didn't get it on the first time, she would repeat it in the exact same way, louder and with great aggravation, and over again, and then just still keep getting madder and say, I don't understand, I've told these people 100 times. Well, sometimes you need to tell people things in a different way or have them experience it in a different way. So remember that everyone learns differently. A recommendation I'd like you to really consider is the Barsh Learning Styles Inventory. You can just Google that, and there's a whole bunch of links, but I found one for Valencia College that takes you there. And we often think we know, are we an auditory learner or visual or kinesthetic, but it's helpful to have that and actually get your scores for people, because it helps you understand how to teach people something. Some people you need to teach them by doing. Other people want to read about it first because they're visual learners. Others want to hear you describe what you're doing as you go because they're auditory. We can have a lot of frustration if we don't understand how people best like to learn. And we can empower our people to say, hey, take this, and then take this inventory, it's very quick. They know their approach, they know their preferred style, and then they can report that back to you and even put the brakes on sometimes. Wait, hold on, I'm a visual learner, can you show me? Right, I need to see it. And so you'll be able to also pick up on people's styles by the types of things that they say. If they say, I need to see it first, or, oh, I see, as you are, as they're completing something or as you're explaining something. So you'll see, if you look up that Barsh Learning Styles Inventory, some great insight and advice there as well. Also, don't just teach those who learn quickly. Others have hidden potential. Sometimes those who learn more slowly or are more introspective might ultimately do the job better. And so try to avoid that temptation and adapt your approach to include all of your people in a variety of different ways. And then finally, remember adult learning theory as well. When you're dealing with adult learners, it's very different than, of course, when we're dealing with younger learners. And so from an adult learning theory standpoint, remember the idea of self-concept. So as people mature, they move from being a dependent personality toward being more self-directed. So we don't just want to teach them and go through PowerPoint slides, as unfortunately we're doing now, but you want to be able to have that ability to be self-directed. Also experience. They have a whole bunch of experiences that provide great resources for learning. So help draw into that experience, whether it's something experienced 10 days ago, 10 weeks ago, 10 years ago, but you can draw in that when you have adult learners. Also, readiness to learn. They are interested in learning as long as it has relevance to their job. And so making sure that you tie that in is so important. Also, adults have an orientation to learning. Their perspective changes from gathering knowledge for future use to immediate application. And they're more focused on problem-centered learning than subject-centered. So instead of, today I'm going to teach you how to do this, it's more like, hey, here's a challenge that's come up. Let's learn this together. Let's walk through it. They also have a motivation to learn through internal incentives. The need for self-esteem, curiosity, desire to achieve, satisfaction of accomplishment. So when you can tap into what people's motivations are, you have the opportunity to really help them develop. And then finally, relevance. They need to know, why do we need to know this? And that's why I encourage you to start with why. I think that's something that we really need to remember. And if you say it doesn't matter now, that really can diminish people's natural interest. You don't have to teach them every part of the process, but just help them see how it fits into the process. So as we've come to the end of our time today, by way of a brief wrap-up, I'd like to review the strategies. We started with preparing yourself and then preparing your people. Starting with why, so people see why they were chosen and why what you're teaching them or developing them on is important. Keep a record of development. Foster growth through the atmosphere that you create in your organization or your, however large or small your sphere of influence. Strike while the iron is hot and capitalize on those teachable moments. Also, harmonize your focus and use those 5-minute focal points. And it's a funny expression because there is no word for consistentize your focus, which is what I really would love to have. So we have harmonize your focus. Be patient, ask questions, and adapt your approach. And even with certain individuals, if one approach isn't working, that doesn't mean we throw up our hands and we say, well, forget it, that person can't be developed. We have to work with that person to come up with the best approach. So as you think about these strategies and think about what we've covered today and what each of you have shared, I'd like you to please take a moment to ask any questions that you might have so that we can address those at this time. You've got the questions board. And somehow I lost my questions. I need to pull those back up here. Okay, so if you have specific questions and other suggestions that you'd like to make, please go ahead and chat those in now. The other thing that I would like you to chat in, please, is what your key takeaway is. So what you're going to do differently as a result of participating in this webinar, what you'd like to share with your team. So if you can send that as well. I have a couple people saying no questions, helpful. Let's see what this says here. Just a moment. Tell them why. Looks like that was something that was mentioned by a few people as being a key takeaway. Let's see what else. A learning style inventory, listening to the employees. It's so important that we really do adapt to our individuals and that we are paying attention to them and noticing also what type of feedback they appreciate. And sometimes, you know, it's very helpful and you can be very deliberate and say, how do you like to receive feedback? That is a very straightforward, helpful way to ask someone. And just imagine if your manager, maybe some of you have had this experience, but if your supervisor has asked you that, it is so helpful. We have a strategy here at Creative Restaurant Solutions where when a new employee starts, they fill out a document and I like it when my manager does this. Here's how I like to receive feedback. Some people say, you know, I'd like it to be in private, or it's helpful for me if it's written. You know, all of those types of things. That can be really, really helpful. Got a whole lot of other items that have come through here, so let's see what else we have. As far as, here's a question. When it comes to performance reviews, longer and more detailed is not always better, especially as a contributor to someone else's review. Do you have any methods or suggestions to gather performance feedback more concisely? Great question. I'd love to hear if anyone else has suggestions on this. One of the suggestions that I have is that as, you know, first of all, I completely agree that longer and detailed is not always better, and performance reviews really should not be a surprise. If you are consistently in touch with your people, they know where they're doing well, they know where they are not doing as well. And so that's an important piece for us to remember and to reinforce with our people. I want to look and see if other questions have come in on that. We have a lot of questions here. Just bear with me for a second, please. But the other thing is to really emphasize and take a look at that performance review if it's within your power to do so, even the format. Are you asking about the most important questions? Are there specific areas that you want to be able to focus? And I think that when it comes to gathering the performance feedback, if you are very clear on what the expectations are for that position. So we created an exit interview performance feedback, and those are different characteristics that we need for the people who are on our admin team. And so being very specific about the behaviors that you're looking for and the outcome. I hope that's helpful. That's a question I'd like to consider a little bit more as well. A few other questions that have come through, and some people have sent their key takeaways. Let's see. Here is, I am in charge of learning and development for a large company, 20,000 employees. How would you recommend we apply these techniques on a large scale or perhaps electronically? So one suggestion I would have there is for something like the 5-minute focal points, they can get included in any sort of communication that you're typically sending to the field or to the locations. So whether it's a weekly newsletter or a monthly update, but you can focus on that throughout the organization by making that, and I think the 5-minute focal points is a great way to be able to do that. So you can get that information out through a variety of people. Another way is that if you have a brief video or something that people can view or access that learning even as they're signing into their shift for the day, that can be very helpful, maybe on a POS, that they're able to access that. That's something that may be a good way to apply those techniques. Another is that you look at various levels within the organization. So if you have a meeting of your regional managers, for example, focus on this type of content and have them recognize the focus and the importance of development. Or if you have an engagement survey and you're asking people about development and how well supported and educated they feel in their position, take a look at the regions or the locations that have the highest scores and then look to implement that, shine a light on what's working and then implement those strategies across the organization. Those are some great ways to take what you have and expand it throughout a larger firm. If you're a company that does not conduct engagement surveys, that's something that Creative Restaurant Solutions partners with many firms on by doing that, and we always ask about development, so we're happy to help you think through that as well. Another key takeaway that I love is somebody wrote in here, explain that everyone needs development, including myself. And I love that suggestion and as a takeaway because it is really easy for it to feel like it's just a training tool or some sort of remediation, but it's really an opportunity. And I've seen that here, and when Maureen asked me and offered me the opportunity to return to Creative Restaurant Solutions, one of the pieces that she said is, there is a terrific team in place and they need additional development and they would really benefit from that, and it has been delightful for me to spend that time, even though it has contributed to some longer hours for me or some other things that have taken a little bit more time, and I haven't focused as much on the clients as what I ultimately will be, but to spend the time with the team and bring them into things that they were not aware of before and identify their strengths and keep focusing on their strengths and growing there, that has been really helpful as well. So I appreciate all of you who have sent in your key takeaways. I think I've addressed each of the questions. I'm looking here, but I think we got most of them. If not, I'll do my best to loop back. I'd like to thank Chart for the opportunity to speak with all of you today, and thank you very much for participating. It was great to see so much participation. If you'd like to connect with me or learn more about Creative Restaurant Solutions, you'll see my contact information here. I'm very happy to talk with you further. And at this time, I'd like to remind you on behalf of Chart of the upcoming events, including T3 Seattle, Trainers Transforming Training in February. Tara, I'll turn the program back to you.
Okay, we're coming up on an hour now, so we would just like to say thank you so much. We really appreciate it. That was wonderful. Anyone who's still on, I'd like you to know that the recording will be online later today. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Tara. Have a great day, everyone.